Here's what I learned from doing 200-ish interviews. I believe it's about 200, maybe 199. I can't remember exactly, but I can go check my system, and that's one thing I can tell you about, and I can tell you exactly. But the point is, I've done 200 interviews, and honestly, I've been on like 70 or 80 shows as a guest. So I have a lot of experience with this, and I know there's plenty of podcasters who have 400, 800, even 1,000 interviews. So they are obviously at a different level, but I think that I was lucky enough in a way when I started to be ahead of most. Let me explain. So when I was starting to do interviews, this is back in 2020, I had already been doing podcasting for 3 years at that point, and I had been wanting to do interviews for a very long time. I saw Gary Vee and Lewis Howes and Tom Bilyeu, and I saw them doing interviews, and I was like, I want to do that. I can't wait to do it in person again. I've done 1 or 2 live ones, and that was really fun, but it's nerve-wracking, it's different, it's something you have to worry about, like losing a recording to, even more so than just remote, which is weird because remote, you often lose stuff all the time. Now, there are about 5 lessons that I wanted to share with you all that I thought were important enough to tell you. Number 1, preparation is key, but if you over-prepare, and I mean getting started, not so much with each individual interview, we'll get to that in a second, but I mean like just before you even get started doing interviews, preparation is key, but you don't know what you don't know until you've done it. And so I think I was one of the most over-prepared people to do interviews probably ever. I had so much experience looking into all the different people who have done podcasting before, and I looked into what lessons they had shared. One of my favorites lessons was from Lewis Howes, who talks about like the pre-show is the show. So your preparation makes the show. And so I'm telling you 2 different points here. One is macro, one is micro. Macro, just start. I changed my interview process quite dramatically at the 5th interview, the 12th interview, the 50th interview. And even around the 120th, I started my new show and I changed it once again. And so it's one of those things where until you've put in the reps, you don't know what you're going to do. You don't know what you're doing. And I said this all the time with just regular videos and podcasts and blog posts too. 100 reps, 100 reps, 100 reps. But it's true. And so once you've done 100 reps, then you know what you're doing. Now on the micro end of things, I also, especially for the Polycast, but even the PolyTools Creator Spotlight, I always try to prepare a lot for my guests' arrival. I try to look at every single website or social media platform they have and just try to get as much information as possible. From that, I was able to find one of the guests' heroes. Nowhere on his thousands of blog posts and hundreds of podcasts and hundreds of videos does he mention that his favorite person, his hero, was this CEO. But I scrolled through his Instagram one day because I didn't have enough time to consume all 800,000 of his blog posts. I was like, I need to find information, but I need to do it quicker than just consuming media like that. So I went through his Instagram, and a few years back, maybe multiple years, I saw a picture with him and the CEO, and he's like, this is my hero. And I was able to ask him a question about that, and he felt touched. And it's one of those things where by doing that extra work prior to the show, you end up having a much better experience. The guest gets a unique experience, which is very key. And that leads me into my next point is if a guest is prolific on podcasts, then you should do your research and finding out what questions have they been asked before. And so that you can ask them different questions. There are 2 sides of this coin. As a guest, as a speaker, you might have a doctored response that you've created over the course of many different presentations or podcasts, and so you've rehearsed this pitch over and over and over again. While that's great, and by going on podcasts and saying it over again and getting that practice, it'll help you for doing stage performances or, TED Talks and panels. It doesn't necessarily help you in the content creation standpoint because you're just saying the same thing over and over and over again. So as a host, it's our job to give them a unique experience. And so that way, whenever they come on the show, you can be like, hey, I know that you answered this question this way. Why did you do that? Or let's go deeper into that particular topic. And so I like to give my guests a unique experience as best I can. Sometimes we reiterate some same things. Like I had a guest who was a hyper polyglot, meaning he speaks many different languages, not just many, but like a dozen. And it was one of those things where he was tired of being asked about that stuff. But I still had to ask some questions about it, and I tried to get a little bit more meta about the whole topic rather than just asking, how do you become a polyglot? Because that question has been answered many different times before, not just by him, but on other people's shows too. Hell, even on the Polycast, it had been answered at some points too with other polyglots that are 3 or 4 languages. So I wanted to ask him, what is the difference between those polyglots and a hyperpolyglot? So the interesting thing is, as a host, as someone who's done 200 episodes, I feel like that's been a lot of my life. It's been about 4.5 years or so. And that's a long time. It actually took a lot of effort and to the point of basically burning out or almost burning out a couple different times. And at one point, one of my tools, Repurposed.io, broke on me, and it actually caused about 22 interviews to be sent to YouTube at a very low resolution to where it was unwatchable. And so I had to re-upload those, and that really stung to my growth. I think that really made a difference. And people who saw that, like the guests who saw that, they're like, this is garbage. Like, why would you post this? And I didn't know until then. So I learned that lesson. Like, you need to keep up. If you're doing a whole bunch, you still need to double check to make sure that the upload is good. That's another lesson. Now, when it comes to systems and making sure you're using the right tools and stuff like that, obviously using tools like Repurposed.io, which is a lot better now, but I use Nuelink myself for automation. And so whenever I want to post something online, like I post a new video or interview, it'll go out automatically. And then the idea of the nuances of different tools and how you use them. So I use Notion to create a CRM of all my guests and all the shows that I was going on to, although I kind of disbanded that. But the CRM of all the people, each document being one person and one person's notes on their interviews, I thought was something that was really fascinating. And being able to connect with those people and keep information about them. Like, I think at one point I was even tracking like their job and their birthdays and stuff like that. And while I do think that's a good idea, it's very hard to keep up with that when you start adding more and more people. But all the more reason to create a CRM so that way you don't have to remember it. So it's like, oh, hey, there was an automation in that Notion where it's like, hey, every 3 months, 6 months, you haven't talked to this person. Here's a update. You should go reach out. And I thought that was a great way. Ironically, I didn't go on to the Notion enough to see it. So I wish there was a way to like ping my calendar or something like that, which maybe there is now with Zapier and stuff like that, but back then there wasn't. And I thought that was a great way to kind of keep in touch with old guests. And I often like to have return guests as well. I actually created a separate series for it. It's basically the same thing, but it's just a different feel. I tried to make it feel different. Round 2, let's go. And then I also have an idea for another series. So thinking ahead is another lesson. Now, I don't want to ramble too much. So we've talked a few different key points there, from having a CRM to just doing things like preparing as much as possible. I read someone's entire dissertation or book before having them on the show. You don't have to go that crazy, but I do suggest it if you want to be successful with interviews. And when I started the PolyTools Creator Spotlight, I wanted to take a step back and actually do less preparation and kind of go more with the flow. And that works a little bit with the content creator stuff, but I realized over time that that's just not how I roll. And so as a creator, you have to know what your style is. And so some people love just doing full-on conversations. They don't do any research. They just go in kind of like blank. And they're like, hey, fill me in kind of thing. But I feel like that style is kind of a disservice to your guest because they're coming in. They've already been on other shows usually, probably too. And so you're kind of wasting their time by them having that conversation with you instead of making something new, because they're just reiterating what they did on the last podcast, like I said before. And so I feel like I'm only a fourth of the way there. I don't think I'm going to stop after 1,000 interviews, I'll be honest. But I'm also taking a step back. And so the last lesson I'm going to share with you is you got to know when enough is enough. And like I said, I'm not going to stop. But after doing 7 seasons of the Polycast, and while I don't really have seasons of the PolyTools Creator Spotlight, I'm sitting around dozens and dozens and dozens of interviews. And so it's one of those things where I think the content creator show is going to keep going slowly, and I might do an interview here soon just to kind of keep that alive again. But the Polycast is going to take a break for a while. That last season took way longer than I expected. It took a lot more out of me than I expected. And I needed to take a break from that. I want to be fresh. I want to be excited for guests. I don't want to be drudging like, oh, I have an interview today. Let me make sure I'm mentally prepared for it. I want to be able to be excited for it again. And so I'm going to take a break from doing these interviews. And that's the last lesson I wanted to say is like, hey, know when enough is enough and then go back to it when you're refueled.